Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Sacred cows. That's the topic of today's episode. Sacred cows or issues, topics that are meant to be holy, that we're not meant to touch. And we're going to touch them. We're going to get our hands dirty. The first is sparked by a speech that was given by a well-known Israeli journalist, Kalman Lipskind. I'll talk a bit about that later, where he spoke about those who sleep at night and those who don't sleep at night. A reference to the different two types of Israel that we have today. Those who have sons, daughters, spouses, brothers, siblings, fathers who are fighting, whether inside Gaza or earlier inside Lebanon, and can't sleep at night, as opposed to those in this country who don't have that, and therefore they are sleeping at night. By the way, Lipskind, who is part definitely of the right-wing camp, mentioned even the prime minister himself, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is part of those who, yes, sleeps at night because he does not have sons who are fighting behind enemy lines. What is happening today with inside Israel? What is happening within the national religious camp, what's known as the religious Zionists, which has paid a really remarkable, a devastating price since this war began, with a disproportionate number of its people, of people who come from its community, its schools, its institutions, who have been killed on the battlefield. There was one day just a couple weeks ago where you had almost a dozen soldiers who had been killed who came out of those religious Zionist institutions. Why? Why are they the ones who are laying their lives on the line in a disproportionate number than others? And that leads to a lot of questions and a conversation that is not always going to be easy, but we're going to try to have that today. And then there's the second question that personally has been bothering me for a while. As a journalist for a long time, and as a military correspondent for a long time, I was at those briefings before October 7th with the chief of staff, with the head of military intelligence, with other officers. I was down on tours along the border with Gaza and along the border with Lebanon, and we were told it's okay, they're deterred. We don't have to worry about, they want quiet. And we just took it. Hook, line, and sinker. We believed what we were being told, but really it wasn't true. And we saw that explode on October 7th. And the question comes down to, just like the military needs to investigate itself and the government needs to investigate itself, I would think that also the media needs to investigate itself. Where did we as journalists go wrong? How come we didn't ask the right questions? And maybe had we asked the right questions, that would have prompted the government or the army to do things differently, to re-examine their conventional thinking and maybe change. And maybe, just maybe, have prevented October 7th. Maybe if we do that now, we can prevent another October 7th, or we can help prevent that from happening. But what I see already happening is the media is going back to the way it once was, being a parrot, just repeating what it's told by the IDF, by the government, and not asking those tough questions. We need real accountability. And to have this conversation, I couldn't think of two better people. Shmuel Rosner, a senior fellow at JPPI, and Professor Michal Bar-Shir-Siegel, also a senior fellow at JPPI, both very strong opinions. Both also come from the community of the religious Zionist camp, so know that well, but also know the secular world and the rest of Israel very well. And we're here to talk about this. Shmuel is also a journalist, long time, used to work for Haaretz. Today he's a top analyst at Khan, the public broadcaster. And Michal is the vice president of Ben Gurion University and a Talmud professor herself, but with very strong opinions of everything that's happening here inside Israel's society. So here we go on today's episode of slaughtering some of the sacred cows of the state of Israel. Have a listen. Michal, Shmuel, it's great to have both of you back on the podcast. Always a pleasure. So we're here to talk about, I think, maybe one of the more sensitive topics that we've spoken about since launching this podcast now about 14, 15 months ago. And that is this discourse, dialogue that now I'm hearing all over the place here in Israel. And of course, I'm thinking about it myself. But it's between those who sleep at night and those who don't sleep at night. What am I referring to? Kalman Lipskind, who's actually, Shmuel, one of your colleagues over at channel at Khan at the public broadcaster, is also a well-known columnist for the Maariv newspaper, a journalist, gave a speech or was on a panel last week in a conference with Makori Shon, a more right-leaning, the so-called settler newspaper for the religious Zionist camp, and spoke about the press conference that Netanyahu gave on the eve of his first testimony in the trial. Now he's supposed to be in court giving testimony. And all the questions that Netanyahu was asked was, of course, about the corruption and what's he going to do in politics and this, that, and the other. And barely anyone asked about the war or about the reservists. And Lipskind kind of wrote it off as saying, this is the exact difference between those who sleep at night and those who don't sleep at night. Those who don't sleep at night, in other words, those who are either fighting or have kids who are fighting or siblings who are fighting, are those who care about this war. But most of media in this country, and that was a big generalization, most of the journalists don't know what it's like not to sleep at night because they are, now I'm just adding to what Lipskind said because he didn't say this, but this is the Rashi of what he said. The commentary is they're leftists, liberal, progressives, and they don't serve in the reserves, and maybe some of them didn't even serve in combat units to begin with. But let me add to this, and I think it's interesting that the three of us do come to a large extent from the roots of the national religious movement in this country, or the religious Zionist movement. I can speak about, I was thinking about this the other day, just with like my older children. So I have 4 kids, my 2 older daughters. And I asked one of them, how many funerals have you been to in the last 14 months? And her answer to me, and I kind of knew the answer, was she's like, Abba, Dad, I've lost count. Because there was the teacher from Himmelfarb, and there was the husband of the teacher from Pelech, and then there were the friends who got killed, or the boyfriends or the spouses or the hostages who we knew from the neighborhood. Whatever it was, it's an endless number. Now there's a lot of other people who haven't been to a single funeral in the last 14 months. So my question to the two of you, and I know this is it's a hot topic and it's sensitive, it's contentious because it's really striking at some of what do we call them in Hebrew? Parakdosha, the sacrilegious cow that you don't sacrifice it. You keep it holy because you don't want to get your hands dirty. But this is what we're here for, is to get our hands dirty. So I'm curious what you both think about this issue, how you see it. Michal, why don't you start?
I think it's unfair to attack the media on this point, not because they shouldn't be doing this differently, but because our government, right? You were talking about a press conference with Bibi, right? Or something he was asked at. Our government doesn't deal with the soldier, which is much more severe. They're creating, I don't know if you can say that on your podcast, but a shitstorm of issues and laws, and they're like, we say tarlelet, they're messing the system with gazillion, a blitz of legislation and I don't know, outrageous saying constantly. This is something that we've seen happen in the States as well. They're bombing us from everywhere with this information and news, blah, blah, blah. And the vast majority of it is not about the simple fact of life that we live in a country where soldiers die on a daily basis, our neighbors, our friends, our kids, our friends' kids. And if you look at what our leadership is dealing with, it's as if it's two different worlds, especially since we have a section that refuses to take part of this other reality. And that's something that's completely mainstreamed and mainlined in our government. So true, the media has to work harder to push a different agenda on the agenda we're all living in. But they're reflecting what our leadership is dealing with. And that's the completely surreal reality we live in. And that's just honestly so unethical and so immoral and so belittling of people's life that is just like, you can't breathe when you just stop and look at the news stream that we're getting a day, and you just can't breathe. When my neighbor here I live right next to Anel's parents here in the street, their son died in Nova, and this
Anir
is,
Shapira.
yeah, this is a streamline of news that we're getting when this is happening. So that's, I think, is what is so awful about the situation we're in, and the media is reacting to that.
What do you think? How do you see this, Shmuel?
Well, I'll try to be more analytical when I speak about this. We have a people's army. The IDF is supposed to be an army in which everybody serves. But then we have two things to consider. One, that some members of our society do not serve. We have the whole Arab sector, and they don't serve. We don't call them for army military duty. And we have the ultra Orthodox who refuse to serve, and they're uh, getting larger in numbers. And the government is now trying to exempt them from even having the obligation to serve. So this is one part of the problem. The people who don't sleep at night because they are demanded to serve or send the kids to military service, and those who don't. Now, within the groups of those who do send their offspring to military service, we cannot deny that there is a difference between those who send most of their family to to units in which there's no combat, intelligence units, uh, whatever. They do all kinds of things that the military needs, and there are those who go to combat units, and there is a huge difference between the experience. I know this as a father because one of my kids served in one type of unit, and the other kid served in a different type of unit. And clearly, when your son is in a combat unit, it's a different experience. You fear for his security and for his well being and even for his life at some point. And with the other kid, he does his duty, and he was asked by the IDF to serve in such capacity. So again, I think we should differentiate between those who refuse to come to begin with and those who get into the service, and some of them are asked to become, fighter pilots, and some are asked to become paratroopers, and some are asked to become engineers or doctors or intelligence analysts or to serve in other capacities that are not um, dangerous to the soldiers in the same way. And again, I accept the notion that we should give more, well, that we should be more appreciative and more sensitive to those who serve in life-risking jobs. Then again, if the military decided to send a person to be a firefighter or to serve in a band, there are some bands. Well, that's the choice the military made, and you cannot blame the soldier for not doing his or her duty. They are
No,
doing what they're asked to do.
I totally accept that, but you can't
But,
ignore. But
but,
no, but what? No, but you can't ignore the fact that there is a unusually high percentage of
No
datim,
doubt.
of the national religious, who are getting killed on the battlefields. I mean, I looked up numbers earlier today. It's hard to get the exact numbers, but you had at one point a couple months ago that the number of soldiers killed, now it's just over 800 since the beginning of since October 7th, that 15% of those killed come from Judea and Samaria, come from so-called West Bank settlements. That's more than 3 or 4 times their proportion of the population, right? The fact is that there's so many who come from high schools like Himmelfarb or Chorev, which are national religious institutions, or the Mechina, the pre-military academy of Eli, that has been so demonized over the years because of crazy rabbis, homophobic rabbis who run that place. But look at how they are laying their lives down to keep this country safe. And the question really comes down to, I mean, and you kind of touched on this, Shmuel, that it's a myth that everybody serves in Israel. They don't. You have a lot of people, definitely the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox don't. A lot of even secular Israelis, and even not religious Israelis. You want to get out of the army, there's ways to get out of the army, right? But why is it that in combat, it's so many religious people who are serving? Michal, what do you think?
I don't like this conversation, and I need to say why.
I told you it was going to be a tough conversation. I said that
No,
to begin with.
I hate counting deads from sectors of the society or who serves where. There's no doubt you're right about the percentage, and there's no right to talk about, more Tel Avivi serve in the intelligent than whatever, and there's more direction towards combat, and fine, but this is what we want to focus on. Well, we have entire sections of the population who don't even serve. We need intelligence. We need people to, I don't know, be the people giving out the shoes. We need those as well. And they give up 3 years of their life too. But we have an entire section of the population who don't see any need or any ethical motivation to contribute to saving lives in this country and upholding this army.
So I don't want, I'm
And
sorry
we
to
are
interrupt. No,
wasting
no, but hold on. But,
wait, and the three
yeah.
of us are wasting time talking about, looking down on those.
But I'll tell you
intelligent-
why. I'll tell you why I think it is relevant and it is important, because I hear politicians on the left who say, I will never sit, for example, with Bezalel Smotrich in a government. A lot of these people who are getting killed are voters of Bezalel Smotrich. So you want to tell me, if you're Yair Lapid or whoever it might be who would say, I won't sit with Bezalel Smotrich, that I'm okay with his people dying, his voters dying, but I won't sit with them, with their representative in the same coalition? There's a change here that we can't ignore, that something has changed. When you hear my daughter, my 14-year-old daughter told me the other day she saw a video from, what's that show called? Kochav Haba, right? Like the American Idol style show.
She's
And Aviv,
came out such a father. What's that show called?
I don't watch this
Yes.
stuff, but Aviv Geffen, who him I know, who's like this rock star from the 90s. He was actually did not serve in the IDF, but he's one of the judges there. Apparently said to it, one of the people who tried out, who was auditioning, I think came on, clearly looked dati, peyot, or whatever. Where are you from? Shavei Shomron, Samaria settlement. And then some of the other judges went on, or he even, Aviv Geffen went on to say, it's because of you that our kids are going to have to leave the country. I mean, are you for real? Like, that's the rhetoric we still have?
Again, we should focus on the real problems, and we have huge problems now, and that's not the time. I'm sorry, Shmuel, but it's not the time to start talking about, there is a difference between parents like that and parents like, we should really talk about that, and right. And by the way, the fact that the Tilumi people, or religious people, or mitnachalim people, settlers who are in the occupied territories, they die in disproportionate numbers. This is all true. By the way, very, very interested sociologically, what is it connected to, the motivation to go serve and dedicate your life to certain things. These are all really important issue, not what we should be discussing now. We have entire segments who don't go at all to the army, don't see themselves as part, enjoy the benefit of an army defending their life here, and don't think they need to contribute to it, period. And that's what we should be focused on. Sorry.
Shmuel.
Well, Michal started saying this. This has such sociological reasons. The fact that more religious volunteers go to serve in combat units is due to a certain type of education, certain type of atmosphere surrounding them, and also other factors such as the type of education that they get. If you need engineers, or if you need people who go into technological units who have some ability to deal with sophisticated scientific concepts, and some people are able to do this and some aren't, then you get this phenomenon, and I agree, it's uncomfortable that the less educated contribute to combat units more than the more educated. That's the way it is. If you need people in certain places when they have a type of knowledge that the Dati community does not provide for, if people go to religious schools and can't speak English, and we know there is an issue with English at religious schools, and you need people to serve in the the unit of the military spokesperson, and they must know English. So you cannot draft people from the T schools to serve in these units. Again, there is the issue of education and motivation, and I think that the communities who send so many of their offspring to combat units deserve praise. We should mention that these communities often don't send their daughters to military service at all. That this also should be counted as contribution
Good
in
point.
the T communities don't send female, so well they do, but not as many female soldiers.
Very small
So
numbers.
sorry, there is a give and take here that we can all negotiate. But if you want to take this issue and turn it into a political talking point, well, why won't you sit with us in a coalition when we send so many children to battle? I'll say, well, a coalition is a matter of ideology. It's not about your level of contribution. We praise the contribution. We fight shoulder to shoulder, and we appreciate and admire all those who sacrifice. But this doesn't mean that we can sit in the same coalition if we have significant disagreements on matters of ideology and policy.
I want to shift gears for a moment, and I want to talk about another issue that's really troubled me, and I think that you two would have what to say about it. But, I was thinking now that the war is kind of winding down, definitely in the north, but also in the south. I look a lot at the coverage of the military and the IDF, but definitely by the military reporters specifically. I used to be, for about 10 years, a military reporter myself and still write a lot about the IDF and operations. And I feel like there has been no atonement or no accountability or reckoning by the Israeli media at all for what led to October 7th. And, Shmuel, you're also an active journalist, Michal, but you're looking at it from the side, but I'm very curious how you see it. But I wonder, why is it that there hasn't, by a quick story. I mean, I was just about a year before October 7th, or even half a year, in briefings with the chief of staff and the heads of military intelligence. And whenever we would get to the question of Gaza, oh no, they're deterred, it's okay. And then you just kind of turn the page and move on. No one asked, including myself, no one asked any tough questions. And it's like, it's as if we don't, no one's saying, what, 1 second, where did I go wrong? All these people have been covering specifically the IDF for all this time. Where were their tough questions over the years? Don't they think that they need to be hold themselves accountable? Think about maybe where they went wrong and how they'll now maybe do their job differently. Like, why are we seeing now, again, the parroting, literally the bird, just parroting and repeating whatever they're told by the IDF spokesman once again? This drives me personally a little crazy, gets me a little upset. But I wonder, like, why do you guys think this isn't even happening? There is no conversation about this here in Israel. What do you think, Michal?
I think we have a problem in Israel, which is it's a nice problem. We don't have separation, even though people try to present us as a torn society. It's not true. The media has, a brother serving in the army and a kid serving, in the IDF, and we're all meshed together. Academia, we try to say that academia is separated from the army, but we're independent and not connected to the war. For example, this is one of the claims made against BDS, that academia has nothing to do with what the army is doing in Israel. We're going way ahead, and we should, towards students who serve in the army. We pack packages at the university we're meshed together. And I think this is why when they ask, why does the media doesn't talk about what's happening in Gaza, the war crimes that's happening in Gaza, why is the media not reflecting on it? There's a lot of reasons, right? The IDF is hiding and blah, 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 but they could do more. And they don't, because we prefer, they themselves, I think, are part of the Israeli mindset that prefer to say, now we're cocooned in the need to defend ourselves against the animals that are surround us. And
Yeah.
that's the mindset of all of us. They did the worst thing that they could do to us, a Holocaust, and now we're in protective mode. And give us a break. We don't care, and the media is part of that. And they're not playing the part of the devil's advocate and cunning and pushing, and they try to do it, and certain people do, but it's always soft because we're all part of the same thing. I always say it's a nice problem to have, because we really are b'yachad nenatzeach, even though it's used so cynically and so awfully, because we are this part, but it shouldn't be. There should be more account. There should be more. And when the IDF, and I think one of Shmo's survey, he could talk more about this. The trust in the army, even though we saw them fail miserably, the trust in the army rise back, right back up. Right, one of your survey, you can give the numbers better than I do, but I'm reading you, so it rose right up, and because we wanna believe our army that we're not doing a genocide, we're not doing war crimes, and this is our brothers and sisters and our our neighbors, and we want to believe them when they say it, and we're all in this together. And there's good sides to it, but there's also bad sides, because if we do bad things, and if the army does make mistakes, and the army doesn't take care of it, and it doesn't, by the way, it doesn't happen with the police anymore, and it doesn't happen with other, but the army still has our trust. And this is because this is, as Shmuel said, we're the army of the people. And I think it's a little bit similar with the media as well. And I think that's why it's happening, because we're all part of the same thing.
Come from the same place, and we all give to the same cause, essentially. But Shmuel, does this bother you? I mean, you're spending a lot of your time in a studio. You were telling us before about your appearance on the Khan TV broadcaster earlier today, talking about different things. Where does this come from? This lack of ability to hold those authorities accountable, to ask those tough questions.
Well, first of all, there are structural reasons that all, you're a veteran journalist, you're familiar with the structural reasons. Military correspondents depend on the IDF for information. If they become highly critical of the IDF, if they, if they ask tough questions, or they become, cover the military negatively, the stream of information will dry up. This will become a problem for them. So the IDF has all kinds of tools to, I'll say the word manipulate, but it's not. I'm not talking about manipulative in a. That's what institutions do. There's a media, and they try to control the narrative, and they use whatever tools that they have to control the narrative. So that's one structural reason, and it's the same for all journalists all over the world who cover all institutions. You can say the same thing about diplomatic correspondents who cover the ministries of foreign affairs in all countries, and you can say the same thing about the economic correspondents who cover certain institutions as well. You depend on the sources, so you have to recalibrate your ability to criticize the institution without losing your sources. The second reason is what Michal just mentioned. The IDF, Israel is not the United States in the sense that there is the media and there is the military, and these are worlds apart who never meet. We come from the same places. Most military correspondents in Israel served in the military. Many of them still serve as reserves in the military. It's, criticizing the military is criticizing themselves. Now, of course, after October 7th, you can say, well, there was a failure of intelligence. This is something that all journalists did say after the fact. And you ask, your question is it's a good question. Well, were you were you journalists smarter than the analysts of intelligence before the war? And the answer is no. The IDF didn't see it coming. The government didn't see it coming. The Knesset didn't see it coming. We were all taken by surprise. This includes the media. And when you say, well, did we do the necessary soul search after the fact? I'll, like a good Jew, I'll respond with a question. Well, did the government do what it needs to do? Did the IDF do what it needs to do? But it's a difficult process to have. Hopefully, at some point, people will become more aware of the need to be critical and think critically about the information they get from the IDF. Then again, I'm not. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think we prefaced by saying that we're going to slaughter a couple of sacred cows on this episode. And I think we did that definitely with the beginning. And I think also here, in my view, at least, just like we need the government to have a commission of inquiry, we need the IDF to have its own investigations. We need people who were responsible to go home, and I think that it's overdue for some of the people, including the chief of staff, the head of the Shabak, the prime minister, to be held accountable. Whether it's he's not going to resign, but new elections, whatever it might be. But there is something about the culture of accountability in this country that severely lacks and does not necessarily exist. And I think that we see that all over. And by the way, it touches also on the earlier topic as well, is that we're writing off a lot of what's not happening or things that are happening because we're saying, listen, we can't touch this now, or we shouldn't touch on this issue, or it's too sensitive, or and I'm not blaming. Michal is right to a large extent. This isn't the time to be dealing with these kind of things. But I also think that on the other hand, it is the time to deal with it, because what will happen is we will go back to the way we were before.
I actually think that your questions about the media are extremely important at this moment, because we actually see how investigative journalism that's done, like Uvda or Viv Drucker's shows or others, they actually produce investigation, they actually reveal, they actually push. This is the place of journalism to shine at the moment, and we should be doing much more of it. I think your question actually now about the media is a good question. I explained the psychology why it's not happening, but I think definitely we should be pushing much more for that. But
what the media does now is to tell us how the military failed. It doesn't tell us how the media failed.
Yes, and I think that the media, by when I see a story, and I see them now every day, IDF wraps up, Division 98 wraps up its operations in Lebanon, destroyed 10,000 targets, killed 500 this, that's the thumping on the chest. That's the let's applaud and give ourselves a standing ovation. But in reality, that's not the story. That's what you're telling us. But the journalist should be saying to them, okay, good for you, but what about this and what about that and what's going to happen here and what's going to happen there? But those questions aren't asked. And I know it's difficult. And trust me, I was there. You don't want to push because you want to get the access. It's the constant relationship. But if October 7th doesn't change that for journalism, then I think we do have we have a bigger problem than we might think. But with that, I've held you both long enough. So I want to thank you, Shmuel Rosner and Michal Bar-Sher-Siegel. Thank you both for joining me. To our viewers and listeners, you can catch us as always on podcasts where they can be found, Apple and Spotify. This will also be on YouTube and, of course, in the Times of Israel's website. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, let's hope for a quiet weekend and a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you very much.